Well, I want to say thank you to Joel and the whole team for having me here, and thank you to you for coming out for Creative Mornings Sex. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to talk to you about sex and the Bedsider program. I'm going to rely on my notes here so that I stay on track and don't ramble too long. You may have noticed one of the songs that was playing was not in English. It was a Greek song. I asked for it to be played. It's called Kian Se Thelo, and it roughly translates to Though I Want You. And I asked for it to be picked because I have a lifelong love for Greece and for a Greek woman. But it's also a reminder of how well popular media uses themes of sex, and how missing it is for typical healthcare interventions in that area. And really that's what the Bedsider program's all about. Now, another reminder, Joel referred to it already, but that this is a sensitive topic, especially in the United States. Another reminder is your name tags. You know, why do we use euphemisms for sex? Mine, by the way, is tarmac. It's a shout out to US Airways. I couldn't resist. But does anybody out there have a favorite they want to shout out? Come on, don't be shy. One more? Coloring. Okay. Well, it's a reminder of how it can be hard, how it can be hard to talk about. So I'd like to start by showing you a TV ad that we've created that takes on some of these issues. And let me just let it run, and you'll see it's going to be it's a little dark, so it's going to be hard to hear. But luckily, there's good music.
Danse, balance la cadence, ondule bien tes hanches au bal du dimanche. Danse, que la fête commence. Dans ma belle robe blanche, je suis ton chou.
You didn't give up on sex. Don't give up on birth control either. There are more methods than you think. Find yours at bedsider.org.
So if you couldn't see that, you can go to YouTube and see it and a whole bunch of other ads we've done. We have a new series actually that we created in partnership with BET that's running on that network and now starting to run some other places. This ad and the others do a really great job, I think, of reflecting the values of the Bedsider program. But before we dive deeper into the program, let's talk a little bit about what the heck is going on out there. This is hard to juggle, but I'm gonna manage. Yeah, maybe that'll work. I can drink with two hands, but
Sorry, juggling with one part of the I'm like a roadie.
that's great. All right, great. I can project too. Perfect. Okay, so Bedsider was created to address a significant problem with unplanned pregnancy in the United States, especially among young people in their 20s. 7 in 10 pregnancies to single women in the US aged 18 to 29 are unplanned. 7 in 10. And this is the case even though most people in that age group think pregnancy should be planned, and most people say it's important to them to avoid pregnancy right now in their lives. But among those having sex and not trying to get pregnant, 19% of them use no contraception at all, and 24% say they use it inconsistently. So the intentions don't match the behavior. And among those who say it's very important to avoid an unplanned pregnancy right now, 34% of those people say that it's at least likely that they'll have unprotected sex in the near future. And what we know when we look at those data is that when people say that, that's what happens. They're going to have unprotected sex. So with this as the situation, the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy in the late summer of 2008 started to look closely at the reasons that people were getting their birth control wrong, so that we could reduce the number of unplanned pregnancies. What were the reasons beyond cost and access for the failure? So we started our research by taking a look at what was out there right now, and the state of the state of sexual health and behavior change is not very pretty. You can ask yourself, what does this have to do with sex? This is a website to help women find emergency contraception, except instead it looks like she's looking for better car insurance. And it's beige, certainly not the color of sex. And this one, these are some pamphlets that you can still find out there. And I always have to ask the question, why do the people with vaginitis look so happy? So the problem is that sex isn't science, but we keep attacking these issues with squeaky clean, very desexualized logic, like you saw there. Sex is emotional, it's carnal, it's intense, it's funny, it's healthy. Yet none of these things are represented in all those things that you saw there, and most of what's out there. And our target audience, millennials, were ignoring all of that, with good reason. So we quickly realized we needed to create solutions that matched the subject matter, and we needed to adopt a tone that was not so easy to dismiss. And we realized that our product wasn't really birth control. It was a better lifestyle, better sex with birth control. So we employed human-centered design to get at the right tone. And for those of you, I imagine in this audience, most of you are familiar with that term. But for those of you who aren't, it is what it sounds like. It puts human desires, especially latent desires, those desires that people aren't so easy to articulate themselves. It puts those desires at the center of the process. And it allows their needs to be revealed in a way that can't happen in a focus group in a white room. So to step into the lives of the women in our age group, we did these intense in-home interviews, and we came away with a number of insights. So first is that typically in the United States, education comes at the wrong time, in the wrong context, if it happens at all. Think about when all of you had sex education. In the United States, many people get it at 12 or 13. My daughter's about to turn 13. She'll get it one more time and that's it. That's like learning to drive when you're 10 and then being handed the keys to the car when you're 17 and being asked to drive and doing it right. In the heat of the moment, all bets are off. When it comes to getting it on, we just turn our brains off. And that's the fun part. We want to do that. We don't actually want to mess with that in the Bedsider program because it's what we all crave, to lose ourselves in passion. But that's not so good when it comes to protecting yourself. So Brianna was a woman whom we had recruited specifically because she was hyper vigilant about protecting herself and adamant about doubling up, using 2 forms of birth control even. But she told us a story about when she went to Mexico, got drunk, and having unprotected sex. And in that drunken moment, she just wanted to get busy. And it's also a great example of how alcohol plays a huge role in this issue. And to be totally blunt, people like to get drunk and get it on. If you don't believe me, ask yourselves. And it's really easy to pass judgment, until you ask yourself that question and find empathy for people and what they're doing. So we decided in the Bedsider program that we had to take it head on, address it head on. So booty trumps Jesus. We weren't being anti-religious with this insight. We were just simply telling it like it is. We heard this amazing story from a woman who was a Sunday school teacher. She had a child out of wedlock, taught abstinence at her church, using herself as a cautionary tale. But she had a secret she was keeping from the congregation. She was unmarried and pregnant again. And we're like, how does this happen to you? It happened once, you're teaching youth how to prevent it yourself. And how does it happen when you're teaching people to do just the exact opposite? And she came back to us with this great quote. She said, when you're in heat like a bunny, you just have to have it. And that's a tiny fraction, I promise you, a tiny fraction of the stuff that we learned. It was endlessly fascinating and endlessly complicated. So we knew we couldn't just design messaging to raise awareness. An ad campaign wouldn't solve the problem, on its own anyway. Or just to give people better tools to remember to take their birth control. We had to create a whole system, a series of interventions to solve the problem that would support women every step of the way. Because behavior change is a journey. It's not fixed in time. At least it's not fixed in time with this issue. And there are all these little points along the way, like this, that either buoy you up to help you stick with your plan, or push you down and nudge you off course. And birth control, as I said, adherence is not a one-time behavior change. Your bodies change, your relationships change, your tastes change over time. So it's not like organ donation, let's say, where that is actually a one-time behavior change, and there are interventions designed for that take into account this one-time change. And this kind of change is something very important when we started, after interviewing all these women, we then went to look at theoretical models that could support our work. So we saw the stages of change model, where we focus on the preparation to action stage and how to reinforce a good action. Or the health belief model, where we focused on perceived barriers and improving self-efficacy, confidence, so that people gain confidence in using their method. And we look to behavioral economics as well, and talk of hot and cold states, as well as biases like optimism bias, the tendency to be overly optimistic about outcomes, like it's okay if just this once we have unprotected sex, right? That's a great example of optimism bias. And we also were inspired by people like Dan Ariely and his work with irrational behavior, and B.J. Fogg and his systematic approach to behavior change. And that systematic approach really helps us when we're looking at a behavior change that happens over time. So using theory and human-centered design, we've tried to address the real issues and hurdles that women face at every stage and give them tools they can actually use to stick with their plans to avoid pregnancy. Part of it's education for sure, but it's education in a voice that makes sense and coming from the point of view of the women we're trying to speak to. So the goals of Bedsider are this. It's to take the fear and mystery out of birth control, to help women find a method that's right for them, to help them understand how to use it consistently and effectively, and to gradually encourage women to consider more effective methods of birth control. So here's one view of the Bedsider homepage. And you can see at the bottom a link to real stories where you can compare methods by watching videos of real women, actually, and men, talking about the good and bad aspects of birth control. So you're able to choose a method with identifying with a real person, not an object. But speaking of objects, we've got those too. Here's a shot of what we call the Method Explorer. And our goal here is to demystify the objects. There are 17 categories of birth control represented there, all at scale. So, there's a lot of anxiety and lack of knowledge about an IUD or an implant, especially those methods that go in you. Well, there's these anxiety, well, how big is it? So if you roll over these methods on the Bedsider website, we compare them to like a matchstick and other things, or compare them to each other. So there's a NuvaRing right in the center next to a pack of pills. Well, they're quite a lot larger than the IUD and the implant in the top left. And we offer filters at the top that you can see to help people select their methods as well. One of these filters you can see is Party Ready. It addresses that issue of alcohol I talked about earlier. Well, there are some methods actually that you can use that are easier to use if you like to party. So why not consider those methods? That way you get the best of both worlds, right? And here is, on this page and on the ensuing pages when you click through, we offer all of this information up to anybody who wants it through an RSS feed. So it's a great way for us to share information. And I'd like to talk about sharing for a little bit. I was asked by the great museum thinker, Mike Edson, this question at a conference session we did it together about a year ago. And that question and my answer, which you can guess is a resounding no, succinctly states my philosophy of change. You can't do it alone, especially with an issue like this in a country that's this big. But how do you mainstream sharing? All the little things count. So one example for us is that early on in the Bedsider program, we knew that imagery was really important. You know, we looked at the imagery up front and we saw how it looked. All that stock photography, nothing was really right for us. And it was all really expensive. So if you go to Getty Images, you're going to pay a boatload. And we're a nonprofit. We couldn't afford those recurring charges. So we decided we would take all of our own photography. Well, that ended up being a great benefit to us because we own it and we can share it. And what we're able to do is seed the reproductive health community with great imagery. So we can put it up in clinics and like I said, give it away. And hopefully there's a mention of Bedsider, but frankly, that's not even as important as it sounds. It's just really important for us to share our material and to build a coalition of influencers who can help us gain legitimacy and inoculate us against those who believe that in the absence of perfection, the best course of action is to do nothing. You all have been there, right? I'm the king of the saying that that perfection is the enemy of the good, right? The perfect is the enemy of the good. And inoculation, when it comes to sex, is really important. You have to have a coalition of people who say, this is okay. For us to move forward, the whole country's dialogue forward in how we talk about sex. If we can talk about sex, we can talk about birth control. So back to Bedsider, it's more than a website, as I said. It's an entire system ready for people when they're ready for it. The system is loaded with ways for us to keep in contact with women all the time and buoy women up in those moments where they need extra help. And different parts of the system focus on segments of the audience and their specific challenges. And here are some of those other parts. The Where to Get It section is a comprehensive lookup for reproductive health representing a number of data sets like Planned Parenthood clinics or Title X clinics, and we're adding to it all the time. This is a section that we're going to be re-engineering actually starting next week, and in that re-engineering we're actually going to give a homepage on Bedsider to every clinic that wants to be in the Bedsider system. Because a lot of community health centers in the United States don't have a tech team, so we're hoping to give it to them and then allow them to control the data in the system, update their phone numbers when they want to, etc. This is one of our Frisky Friday emails. I'd love it if you went back and signed up for it. About 40,000 people receive this weekly communication from Bedsider now. And these emails aren't always about birth control, as you can imagine. I mean, how could we hold your attention if it was? This one is actually about the cost of about the issue of sharing the cost of birth control with your partner. But these are lifestyle emails with prompts about birth control. The bottom line is that they're motivational and they subtly prompt women to ask themselves, am I using the right form of birth control right now in my life? This is a widget that we created that's quite popular. It's a widget so you can put it on your own website, and it addresses the issue that most people, now before the Affordable Care Act, most people didn't know that their birth control is actually free. In California, there was a survey done, and for women who could select any method of birth control for free, a majority of them didn't know that. So this widget, if you use your zip code and type in and use your zip code and answer a couple of questions that are not personal at all, we tell you whether birth control should be free to you or not. And then send you to the clinic finder where you can go and get it. And now with the Affordable Care Act, for most people, any method of birth control should be free, and that includes the most effective methods of birth control, and that is a huge change. So as you might guess, mobile is a really important part of the system. About 50% of our visits now come from mobile, and we're playing catch up on that, frankly. All of our content is not yet on the mobile platform. And maybe we'll come back to this, but I'm not a huge fan of a responsive website. I could talk about that, but our approach is to do adaptive design rather than responsive. But for those of you in the back who can't see this message, this one says, 62% of drivers have flirted with someone in a different car. Hands on the wheel and take your pill. I thought it might be cool just to read one or two others from whoops. Well, I'll let that go on. Ducks have penises, chickens don't. Instead, roosters and chickens transfer sperm by rubbing their cloacas together. Pill now, look up cloaca later. Yogasm, when you orgasm during a yoga pose. Pill now, downward dog later. Today's a good day for cupcakes, don't you think? Pill now, why not whip up some later? And there's a link to a good cupcake recipe. So it's a mix of things that keeps your attention. And, you know, it's not a message from a robot. That's the most important thing. It's a human voice with a point of view, and it changes every day, as you see, so it's not easy to dismiss. It's relevant to your life instead of just being medical. And it's motivational and a prompt to take your pill. Because we tune out alarms, don't we? But this approach has really turned out to be viral with very little attrition and a really high response rate. And that's true about mobile anyway, that texting especially, that I think according to some surveys I've read, 98% of those messages are opened. So you can't argue with that. And over the last 3 years, we've done a lot to change the system and tailor it. We have appointment reminders, and we've added a lot of tailoring to the system. Research indicates that the top reason that women miss their pill, 13%, is because they were away from home and didn't take it with them. There's a lot of confusion about, well, I missed it. It's 2 hours later, 4 hours later, can I take it now? Well, yeah, you can usually. And so we built in a snooze feature to Bedsider. So you can just say snooze, you can text back, snooze 4 for 4 hours, and we'll send it to you again. But we won't let you exceed the amount of hours that after which you would need to use a backup method. So I could go on and on talking about mobile, but let's get to Real Stories. This is the homepage for Real Stories, where you can find over 50 videos now of men and women talking about all of the good and bad aspects of using birth control, every method. In one real story you might check out, Monique talks about forgetting to take her pill, the story I was just talking about, and using a reminder in placing the pill. Her reminder was placing her pill next to her toothbrush. Well, now with Bedsider and Bedsider reminders, she doesn't have to use that mnemonic. Here's another section, fact or fiction. Here's one example of 27 fact or fictions that we have available now. These animations tackle popular myths, like you can't get pregnant if you have sex during your period, or if you have sex in a hot tub. The myth you see depicted tackles the myth that men can't buy lady products like emergency contraception. All of the videos end with a doctor debunking the myth. It's also an example of our goal to create once and produce everywhere, because these videos aren't only on Bedsider. You can go to YouTube, you can find them on MTV, they're running on Navy ships, and there are a lot of other places. We use them as PSAs. And here's an example of one of them and how we used it as a PSA of sorts as a pre-roll on YouTube.
I always heard that a hot tub is actually the safest place to have sex without getting pregnant. With all the chlorine in the water, the sperm don't stand a chance.
So there were over 600,000 plays of that when we ran it on YouTube. When you clicked through, here's the answer you got.
So let me tell you, sperm are strong. And in a single ejaculation, there can be up to 500 million sperm. It only takes one to get in there and fertilize that egg. So having sex in a hot tub is just like having sex anywhere else. There is nothing special about the water or the chlorine or the heat or the bubbles that's gonna kill off these sperm. Mind you, if a guy ejaculates into the water in the hot tub and not into your vagina, you're not at risk. But other than that, sex is sex.
I love the bubbles quote. So the question I always get is, well, does it work? Well, we conducted a pilot test, a year-long pilot test in 2009, 2010, and found that 89% of the participants said that Bedsider helps them use contraception more accurately, and 88% of them reported that it helps them avoid gaps in their contraceptive use. And the really big news is that we just completed a year-long randomized controlled trial in the United States and saw a decrease in the amount of unprotected sex in the Bedsider group. And we saw some other gains too, like knowledge. And we're hoping to publish this information really soon, probably in the summer. And hopefully with Bedsider, we can make it easier to talk about birth control and easier to use, maybe even fun, because we're doing it in a way that uses real language to connect to real people. The other question I get is, what about guys? And absolutely, that's a valid question. But with Bedsider, the early research helped us focus our attention on women because almost all of the methods are for women. And women are actually, 99% of the women in this country have used birth control and understand it as their burden. And maybe that's something we can change in the future, but right now they're kind of at a different stage of change than men. Many men, unfortunately, don't think it's their problem, their responsibility. So they're at a different stage of change. So for them, we actually have to do something different. And we're starting to do that, and I'm going to show you our first pass at that, something that you can find on Bedsider called The Guy's Guide.
When you hear the words birth control, you probably think of the pill. And when you think of the pill, you probably think about sex. And when you think about sex, you probably think, where and how can I get me some of this sex? First off, how much do you really even know about this magic pill that lets you have sex without making babies? Now, there are a ton of different kinds of birth control pills out there, but they all pretty much kind of work in the same way. By releasing synthetic hormones, man-made versions of hormones that a woman's body already makes naturally. Science, right? The hormones in the pill send a signal to the woman's ovaries, telling them not to release any eggs, while simultaneously thickening the mucus down there. So if there were an egg, the sperm can't get through the woman's cervix to look for it. Hey, A for effort, sperm. In order for all this to work, your lady needs to take the pill around the same time, every single day. If she does, and the next thing you know, you're out shopping for strollers and breast pumps. And this ain't a pop and go situation either. The pill can take up to 7 days to start working. So if she just started taking it, try to cool your jets till it kicks in. And remember, the pill isn't do jack to protect you from STDs. So until those lab coat wizards figure that one out, don't go tossing away your condom drawer just yet. And hey, taking the pill every day can be kind of a pain. So until they come up with a pill for us, offering to help her with the cost or remembering to take it could be very beneficial to your non-parental status. Just a quick snack before dinner.
Thanks so much.